Hello and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. My name is Cameron Tuttle. I'm joined today by Isaac Ransom, as always. Isaac, how are you doing? You know, I just did that off the top of my head, so I hope you're pretty impressed with me.
I'm very impressed. And you know what? My day's better because I'm just surprised on how far you've come as my child, you know. Even though you're the expert, the podcast scene, we're coworkers in this. So
It's true, yeah.
I'm proud of you. I'm doing all right. I'm a little sniffly right now. Honestly, like little weird about this show. I don't know what it was, but this movie gave me like no inspiration to talk about anything. So I'm very curious to hear why we've watched this, but overall the week's been going well. Just juggling work and the same old continuation of 2020, just dragging on into a new year, trying to get out of the funk, just like everyone else. So, how about you, man? How's life for you?
It's going all right, pretty good. I just got back from work today, so I'm a little bit tired. I actually had to go into work, which is, different from what I have been doing. But yeah, it's been all right. Today was pretty slow, so you'd think for a Saturday it'd be a little busier, but nope, it was pretty slow. So just hung out and did my thing. Other than that, I haven't really been watching all that much. I started Hitman 3 on the computer. I've been playing PC games since my PS4 has died. But yeah, so Hitman 3, very, very good. I don't know if you have heard anything about it, Isaac.
I've only heard good things. I mean, I enjoy sandbox games. I feel like that's like what makes a video game so different and unique compared to an experience like a movie. I mean, they're both forms of entertainment, but like the sandbox elements just make it feel like you have so much control and there's just excitement. There's energy around it. It honestly brings me back to when I'm a kid, sort of like playing with your toys, because you're like, I could do anything, right? Like it's really all up in the air. So
yeah. In some ways, those are my favorite video games where they kind of give you a set of tools to use, and you go about the problem, solving the problem in any number of ways because of those tools. I like linearity in games too, but I think for me, the most enjoyment I get out of things is figuring out the way to go about solving the problems that the developers have put up in a way that's kind of unique in my own. That's always my favorite. So,
well, that's great. Yeah, I've wanted to try it out. I don't know if I'm gonna pick it up for full price, and a lot of my gaming has sort of been put on pause currently. I don't know. Like, I just feel like I've been waiting for a PS5. I've not been able to find one. So yeah. That's a different conversation outside of movies. But that's a struggle in and of itself if you're excited about that sort of console gaming enthusiast. Cameron and I are console gaming enthusiasts. So yeah, I've been watching a couple different movies. There was a movie that was on the tip of my tongue last week that I wanted to mention. It's called The Town with Ben Affleck and Jeremy Renner. Is that right?
I know it's Ben Affleck. Yeah, it's Jeremy Renner. Yep.
So, the movie was interesting, like kind of a cool bank heist film that tries to focus on a guy that wants to get out of life. I'd say it's probably a little generic, but I enjoyed some of the like direction. There's definitely like this character in the setting of the film, because it's called The Town, so it's based on Charlestown, which is on the East Coast. And yeah, like so it's cool to see like robbers running around with masks and these old like ancient buildings that are like from the colonial days still standing as they're running around. But yeah, I enjoyed it. And then I really haven't been watching much else, honestly. Like it's been weird. Like I've been trying to watch movies. It was hard for me to even find time to watch this film this week. So yeah, but I got through it, and I'm quite curious on why we're watching this, Cameron. So you had nothing else that you really watched?
No. Yeah, I don't think I watched anything this week. I'm trying to think. I don't even remember my week this week. Yeah, I think just this. And then Yeah, just this. So I haven't been.
You like
picking-
my abnormally large water bottle
It's
that I got right here?
ginormous. I saw that earlier. I was like, wow, this is like when in high school the like football players would come into class with like the giant jugs of water. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, so I just have this tendency, and people always think I'm talking about alcohol or something, but I'm like, I just drink so easily. Like, I don't
Yes,
even know what it is, but if it's in front of me, I drink it. And it's not related to going out and drinking. It's just that, so like any water bottle that I get, I just spend so much time filling up. So I saw this at Target. It was on sale for like $12, and it's like, hey, 64 ounces. Let me see if I could do that. 32 was too small. I had a 32 water bottle, and I was like, the only issue is that I use the bathroom all the time, and we were having some technical issues before the show, and so I'm glad I got up because, man, I had to pee super bad. But
yeah, we would have had to pause.
yeah, I'm definitely fueling up. We'll see if we'll do any pauses during this one.
Yeah, you're like the 64 ounces. It quenches my thirst, but also I really have to pee. So,
Well, this show is not about water bottles. It's about movies. You're listening to Cinema Spectator. Yes, you can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Get an exclusive commentary track each month for just $1. Also have the ability to read your questions on air as we go throughout the show and vote on movies that we watch in the coming months. So we do a Patreon-led or chosen episode each month. Again, patreon.com/ECFS Productions if you want to check that out. Patrons, write in questions. You guys don't write it. You never DM us. Our patrons always reach out to us on other like means. And I'm like, guys, if you want like your question right on the air, like just don't talk to me in real life. Just message me there. No, I'm just kidding. A lot of them are friends. So yeah. Write us in questions if you're a Patreon. If you don't have a few dollars, it's all good. Just tell friends and family. Give us a rating on iTunes. That is a huge help to fight the algorithm. Get us up there on the charts. Give us a rating. 5 stars. Write a fun review. Sometimes we'll read the reviews. We appreciate all of you that are listening. Today's movie, I think, needs some introduction, Cameron, because this one, you told me to watch it. It was nothing what I expected, I guess, because I still don't even understand the title. It's called The 400 Blows. French cinema. We're doing French February. Give us a little context here, Cameron.
Yeah, so this is the first film in the French New Wave, the canon of French cinema. It came out in 1959, so a year before Godard made Breathless. So it is pretty much the precursor. I mean, they were the two filmmakers who started the French New Wave, who kind of kicked off the reintroduction of artistic cinema into French culture. And I think one of the reasons why I want to talk about this film in particular is, one, because I actually really enjoy it. It's a much better film than Breathless, definitely. It's a much more enjoyable film to watch. And in a lot of ways, I think Truffaut has a lot more to say, like actually to say about film than someone like Godard does. And I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of perspective in terms of Truffaut and the other side of the French New Wave. Because we really, we started this podcast talking about Breathless, talking about sort of how dumb and how bland and maybe even how nonsensical a movie like Breathless is, when, that's kind of the flip side of the coin to the New Wave. There's a lot of pretentious things and there's a lot of terrible things. And I think in this movie, and we'll talk about it obviously, because I think, this movie is effective in a lot of particular ways that I'd like to go into. But this movie is definitely a lot more personal, at least, than something like Breathless.
Just for the audience listening, I'm a casual. I barely remember what French New Wave means, let alone do I want to know what French New Wave means. But Cameron, just go ahead and define that for us.
Yeah, so the French New Wave was essentially, it was an era in filmmaking in French cinema where new, young, sort of hip directors started coming out with films that were low budget, that were very director focused in a lot of ways, that were guerrilla style. They were kind of the small, slim, not bloated movies of this era. And so it's compared a lot to what happened in the 70s, with people like Steven Spielberg, with people like George Lucas. So the new Hollywood, the new young Hollywood, basically, is kind of seen as a reflection of what happened in France in the 1960s. If that kind of gives you a short summary of the ideas.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And because I think a lot of people know about some of the big directors that came out of the 70s, maybe like early 80s as well, it kind of makes sense. Are the French usually like ahead of the curve when it comes to like film?
Well, the thing about France, and this is probably a good time, honestly, to go into sort of the historical aspect of where the French New Wave came from. France obviously was an occupied country in World War II. A lot of the things that happen in film really sort of mirror what's happening in society around certain big moments. And so France, obviously, they were occupied for, I think it was 4 years. They were pretty heavily, regulated under German occupation. And so not a lot of filmmaking happened, obviously, in that time. And then after that, they had a large American influence, as a lot of countries did after World War II. So, they were getting imported movies from the 50s. They were getting a lot of Hitchcock. They were getting a lot of sort of the big budget, the big budget historical movies that we were producing in the 50s. And a lot of that is also reflected in places like Japan, sort of in Germany, but to a lesser extent. So we were kind of exporting our movies in the 50s in the lead up to what would happen in the 60s. And so a lot of these guys, and Truffaut specifically, he was really kind of offended by the French directors in France. And he wrote a kind of a long diatribe in the journal called the Cahiers du Cinéma, which is sort of the leading academic French paper. We've talked about it before on this show. It's something that we go back to kind of often in film history and film criticism and analysis. And he wrote this sort of long, it's not that long, it's only like 15 pages, but he wrote kind of a long article called A Certain Tendency of the French Cinema. And basically it was like ragging a lot on French directors, saying basically they make, pretty much he was calling them out, saying they make kind of garbage. They make not even like passable American garbage. They make like really dumbed down, pretty bad, lazy movies with bad characters, with bad writing, things that are kind of non-inventive. So he goes on sort of a little bit of a tirade of like, why aren't we making good French movies, essentially? And this was written before the French New Wave. It was written in 1954. So he was kind of, think of him as sort of a film, you've watched some of the video essays, right? We've talked about some of the video essays. I think of these guys kind of like the video essayists, who are really openly discussing film form and filmmaking of the time, who are kind of challenging the norms and challenging the fundamentals of their country's, sort of film legacy. And so what we saw in this time, and what I kind of have predicted we would see in the future, maybe not now, but probably, hopefully in the future, is we saw these people who were writing about film in the mid 50s start to direct their own movies and start to implement some of those ideas from their analysis into their films. And so what I would hope happens, and I'm not sure if it will, it might still happen, but what I would hope happens is maybe some of the people who are writing, video essays, they start to make their own films on their own. I'm not sure if that will happen, but that's kind of what that was the historical trend that happened in the new wave. So, you know, that's kind of a context for the history of these directors. It's, not only did Truffaut write for the Cahiers du Cinéma, but so did Godard, and they were kind of they were the two large name contributors to the paper, as well as a guy named Andre Bazin, who was really, really influential in his theory of editing. But we don't have to get into him necessarily. He's just another important name in terms of the French New Wave. So does any of that make sense? Do I need to clarify any of that? I feel like I'm teaching a lecture.
Yeah, I think just the one thing that I'm missing right now is who directed this movie and did they write for that paper that you were talking about? I know you probably said it.
Francois Truffaut. He directed this movie. He directed The 400 Blows, and he wrote A Certain Tendency of the French Cinema.
Now,
he was
did he write or create movies before he wrote in the paper? Like,
no. So, he wrote in the paper in the 50s, and then he started with this is his first movie, The 400 Blows, was in 1959. So he wrote this essay, this really famous essay, in 1954.
All right, just clarifying, because, I don't know. It's hard for me to follow all the French names. It feels like I just kind of get lost in it. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so this is an interesting movie for being a first film. I really didn't know quite what to think about during this film, but I really liked what you said comparing it to Breathless. You said it's a much more intimate story, and I think it's structured in a way that's way more consumable, right?
Totally.
One of my favorite things to do on this podcast is watch the movie with my girlfriend Jules, because she doesn't have an attention span or a commitment to do a podcast and talk about it as if they learned anything from these movies. So it's really fun for me to watch her reaction and kind of bring that casual eye to these conversations. What I noticed with her when we were watching it is that she totally understood what was going on, but she was kind of disinterested in what was happening, right? And I can understand it, right? There's the translation barrier. This film is all in French, right? And just a little bit of context on the plot. It follows the story of a young boy who is kind of in a rough school and a rough household situation, and he's sort of not fitting in there and getting into trouble because of how much he dislikes those situations, and it leads him into more paths of trouble and independence, right? And that's sort of what the movie revolves around. And so this movie is in black and white. It is in French with subtitles. It's in the Criterion channel. So that's how you know it's bougie, And I think all those things can be sort of a difficult turn off if there's zero context. Even if I knew that this movie was the first movie that this guy had made, I would maybe have a little bit more interest in watching it, but I walk in blind, right? And so I'm sitting there, I'm watching it, and by the end, I'm literally just thinking to myself, okay? That's basically what I thought, right? I was just okay. There's nothing inherently bad, and there's nothing super good about it. I think it's a pretty movie, but I just wasn't invested, I think that was the biggest thing. I just did not feel invested in the movie, and I didn't really see where it was going, and I felt like it didn't really go anywhere. And then the ending, dude, that was the most verbal reaction that I had in the movie. I started laughing, right? Because it's that weird zoom and then Finn, and Juliana busts up laughing next to me. She's like, what is that?
The zoom is pretty bad, but I think the ending actually is quite good and quite moving in some ways. But yeah, I mean, talking about, I guess, investment in the movie, I think part of that has to do with as you said, there's the language barrier and the as you put it, it's in black and white. Boo.
Well, come on, Cameron.
But the for me, in some ways, I have to just be like, it. You kind of got to get over that. Like, there's things that you're missing if you let those interrupt your appreciation of a film. To me, this movie is one. It's interesting because you can tell, even if you don't know much about Truffaut, you can tell that this is probably in some ways if not autobiographical, in some ways very influenced by his life, just because of the specificity of the movie, as well as the, it's a bit of a, like you said, it's intimate, and it's also very sweet to all of the characters, even if it maybe shouldn't be. It's kind of approaching the situation in a way that feels like real life, I guess. And in some ways, I think the best parts of the movie are him interacting with his parents in a way that is both very somber about the relationship and also very like loving towards each of the characters. There's kind of moments and conversations that he has with both of them where you almost start to feel like there's a connection there. You almost start to feel like they're gonna break through in a way, and then it doesn't happen. And I think you can tell. Maybe you do need context for this, I guess, but you can tell in my mind that this is something that like he's longing. The director is very much longing for those relationships to be repaired, but has come to the conclusion that they're unrepairable. And I think there's something very somber about that idea. I would say, a lot of where this movie is interesting has to do with the way that it looks at adolescence, the way that it looks at young adulthood, or the striving, I guess, for independence in a certain way. I think what maybe might hold someone like you or I back, just because we're culturally a little bit outside of that area, is like we don't necessarily have a one-to-one connection with being in a French school in in the 50s. So I think there's some barriers in that. I would say, though, in some ways, the power of film is also opening a door into another, maybe into another culture, or opening a door into another person's life in some ways. And I think this movie, you can very much tell that he's kind of portraying his youth as something that he's reflecting on, which is why I don't think the movie necessarily concludes, because and it does, narrative wise it does, but I think what you're hitting on is the movie doesn't come to any conclusions about what it was shown, because in some ways I think it's kind of a reflection of what happened, and like there's no conclusion on him yet. Like he hasn't made up his mind about the things that happened in his youth. He's kind of struggling to come to terms with some of the things that he did, and some of the things that other people did to him as well.
I think sort of what you're talking about with the narrative tying up, but maybe the point not really like coming across strong. It makes sense, but it left me with the feeling of like hanging out with an old friend that's like super nostalgic, right? And they're like, oh yeah, and then remember how we would do this? I remember how we would do this. I remember how we would do this. and then it could just keep going. Like it didn't really ever need to end, right? And that, like, I had to pause for a second in this movie to go like get some food. 20 minutes left in the film. I came back with my food. We resumed watching it. And those 20, I was like, oh, only 20 minutes left to go. You know, like, this is not that bad. And those 20 minutes, like, just kept going, dude. Like, the last 20 minutes of the film, they're like, you're caught, you're being moved, you're doing this, you're doing that, you know. And I'm just like, boy, it just keeps going. Like, what are we getting at here, people? You know, like, where are we going with this, you know?
Mm.
And it's just sort of this open-ended reflection that left me feeling like, again, okay, like, so what? You know, like, so what? And I do agree with you. I think that there is some incredible, like, heartfelt detail in the way that the characters are portrayed, or the environments, or the way like, all the acting is spot on. You know, his relationship with his friend, his relationship with his teacher, his relationship with his parents, you know, kind of that swaying in and out of discipline. And it's grounded, you know, and there's a love for his home too, like in France. I knew right away from the beginning. I was rolling my eyes just because, I don't know, like, French stuff can be kind of irritating to me, and they're just opening with the Eiffel Tower and like the love of the city, and I'm like, okay, like, I don't get it, but I can get the sentiment of, like, you know, home, you know, like like, this is the place. Like, if somebody did that for the Bay, like in San Francisco, like, a great modern example, I think, maybe for an American audience, is the way that Nightcrawler begins, right? Where if you've spent any time in LA, Nightcrawler does all these different shots of, like, places you've been in LA. And they're very, like, insignificant. Well, some of them are significant, right? But some of them are like, I know exactly where that is, and, like, I've been there, and most people wouldn't pick that out as a moment, you know? And I think there's a lot of that in this movie. My shot of the film is this scene where the boy and his friend are, like, kind of running on the loose, like, with little bit of, like, Ferris Bueller's Day Off moments going on. They're running around, and there's this, like, super long pan where it follows him running across, like, kind of like this large overlook, and you see so much of France as it's panning across. And I just thought to myself, I was like, what an incredible time capsule, like, this shot is, you know, like, that is, like, France in this time period, and you just got to see so much so slowly as this, like, boy walks across, and that's just forever, like, materialized. And I was like, whoa, that's exciting. Now, does it really change my feelings about the film that all those things are good? I don't know. Like, I'm not always, like, how do I say this? When I am invested in the film, that's like the icing on the cake, like, all that good stuff that really elevates it to my investment. Whereas this movie, I felt like there's tons of icing on the cake, all this good stuff, right? But my personal investment, I guess, and maybe that's me just being subjective, but I was just like, I don't know what to get out of this. I don't know what to feel. I just feel okay, you know, like, I don't hate it. I don't love it. I don't know what. I just, there's cool stuff. Whatever. I don't know. I don't ever think I could watch. I mean, I could watch it again. I could watch it 20 more times, and I could watch it 0 more times, and it would mean nothing to me, you know, like, I mean, maybe it would mean something after the 20th time. Like, I just hate this movie. The 400 blows, the 400 viewing.
Or maybe you love the movie after 20 times. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, well, I would say for movies like this, where the importance is in a lot of ways characters and the relationships between characters, sometimes you kind of do get invested more and more once you've spent a little bit of time with those scenes. You know, this is the second time I've watched it. I watched it when I was much younger. I think I was just getting out of high school when I first watched this. So it wasn't a movie that I really appreciated back then, or thought a lot about back then. Or maybe I watched it in high school in one of my classes. it doesn't really matter. But I wasn't quite there on my film journey yet. And I think, we'll go into this a bit later, but I think this is definitely a movie that you kind of have to be invested in sort of filmmaking to be interested in. But I think there's reward when you're there, when you're at that level. And I think for me, revisiting it, one of the things that left me, I guess, a little bit awestruck by the movie was how effortlessly it was able to sort of sell you the characters, sell you the experience of these two kids trying sneaking out and causing a little bit of mischief, or when the mom is basically being like, hey, if you do really well on your paper, like I'm gonna give you a couple bucks or whatever, those things that maybe would be trivial in a different movie, I thought were really evocative of something underlying in the rest of the film. Part of me was really impressed by how honest the characters were, and how even the teacher, who's kind of a jerk and who kind of is like, maybe in a normal movie like this, or in an American movie, I guess, a teacher like that would kind of be the butt of the joke in a lot of ways, and he'd be like, he'd be the one where, like, I don't know, the principal in Ferris Bueller's Day Off or something, where he's like, he's just the unrelenting, jerk, essentially. He's the guy who is unable to to get off his high horse, essentially. But in this movie, I think there's kind of a very honest look at the teacher, who's kind of, yeah, he's mean, and yeah, he's kind of, he's kind of unreasonable in a lot of ways, and he throws the eraser in the beginning scene or whatever, and other things like that. But the movie's kind of sympathetic towards him in some ways. The movie's kind of like, he's just a teacher trying to give, trying to do his job, essentially. He's just the guy who is, stuck in a wrong situation. And, he's like, oh, this class. And you're kind of like, yeah, this class kind of sucks. Like this class is kind of bad to him in some ways. And also, he gives that one instant of being very forgiving, or a couple instances of being very forgiving of our main character. And then obviously that comes crashing down as sort of the movie goes on. But yeah, in some ways you're kind of let in to a little bit of the secret in this character. Is he's not that, he is basically the biggest jerk in the movie, but he's also given these little moments of levity and little moments of redemption. And so is our main character. Obviously, I think he's the most well fleshed out, and maybe him and the mom, I guess, or him and the dad. I don't know. But he's certainly the character we focus the most on, and the one we spend the most time with. And you are kind of given both sides of the coin. You're kind of given the, he is kind of a delinquent in a lot of ways. He's not necessarily someone you should look up to if you're a kid watching this movie, or something like that. Like, he's someone who's kind of gone off the path, but also he is definitely given a rough hand at the beginning, and he's also treated really poorly by some of the people around him. He's treated in a way where you could understand where a person like that comes from. And the little moment of redemption that I think is very effective at the end is, he talks at one point in this movie about wanting to see the beach, and that's kind of his only want in the movie, right? He's a character against a lot of convention in what you would think of in like normal storytelling, right? Is your characters should have wants, they should have needs, and they should have obstacles, essentially. So,
well, yeah. I mean, I think he has more than just like wanting to see the beach. Like I think the big thing he wants is independence, right? That's like the whole.
Yeah. So but the beach is kind of, that's his, that's like the ultimate expression of his independence, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, of course, the beach doesn't just mean he wants to go sit on a towel or whatever. Like
lick the sand.
Yeah.
Walk in the ocean with your shoes on. Come on, man. Like
with
what?
Full clothes. Yeah. Yeah. No. Of course, it means a little bit more than that. It's the desire to not be weighed upon, I guess, by his. By the people who kind of treat him poorly, who he's forced to stay around, and in some ways, like I think it's really effective in how it goes about portraying those things. Like if it was a little bit less subtle of a movie and kind of more rudimentary, you could see, I guess, honestly, like a movie like Lady Bird is kind of the same movie. Basically, in a lot of ways. Lady Bird is kind of a remake of this movie, now that I'm thinking about it. But, you think about a movie like Lady Bird, where her desire is to kind of not be put upon by the people around her. And in some ways, she, at the end of the movie, she gets what she wants, but she also feels that sort of loss, of how that happens. And this movie doesn't really go into that. It's a much more ambiguous ending. I think Lady Bird, one of the strange things about it is that last like 15 minutes, I guess, spoilers now for Lady Bird.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of, have you seen it?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent comparison.
Yeah. So like that, the last 15 minutes are a little bit over the top in my, in looking at it. I really like the last, like the finale, the ending, where she kind of comes out of the church and she's like, had a moment of, self-reflection, I guess. But that last like lead up, the kind of denouement of the movie, is a little bit like, okay, she gets, what does she get? Like alcohol poisoning or whatever, like she gets.
I honestly so when I watch this film, like there's very little that I remember about it besides her hometown being extremely similar to this one town that I went to for a wedding. And I don't
Sacramento?
know what. Yeah, there was like this city, or there was like this town outside of Sacramento area, because it takes place in Sacramento, right?
Yeah.
There's this town I went to that like visually I don't know, sometimes I feel like I have weird dreams about that. I don't know. Anyway, liminal spaces, that's like a whole nother conversation. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I thought the movie was kind of obnoxious, and sort of like, what's the point, sort of like this film, right? But the difference is that I think, there's something more empathetic about the main character in the 400 Blows, whereas in Lady Bird, it's seen as like immaturity almost.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like very like free spirit. Like I want to go. I can't relate with that. I guess I'm more of a square. I don't know. Like I just never had that sort of energy. But the end of the movie made me actually like love it, because it made like a statement. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And like that's what I wanted this movie to do. And I know I can't say that like you can't tell movies like this like they need to be this or they need to be that, and it doesn't need to be that. But like I feel like I would have connected with it because Lady Bird I wasn't connecting with till the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't know. It was like it brought it full circle. It had this little nuanced touch. It was trying to say something, you know? And this movie made me feel like I don't know. You know, like that's just and I'm sorry like if I'm not at that level. I heard you say that earlier, right? You said like this is a movie that you have to be ready for, you have to be committed to, and you just got to be at that level. And this is like why you and I wanted to do this podcast, because that is so much of a frustration to me as like a casual movie viewer, right? Despite all this like cinematography that I've been exposed to, you know, like you're basically my guru, training me, showing me all these different movies. Watching this film was not frustrating, right? I'm very meh about it, but it's disappointing to hear now that I'm still not on that high level, you know? Like after all this, it's still going right over my head, you know? And with like a movie like Lady Bird, it didn't go over my head, maybe because it's not so subtle. Maybe that's like all I'm missing.
Sure.
It's like I don't know, but like on the opposite end, I've seen movies that are more subtle that I connect with earlier on. You know, like I'm invested in, like at the beginning, maybe it's a stylistic thing, maybe it's I really do think the fact that, and you said you have to get over this, Isaac, but it's black and white, it's in a different language. There are a lot of barriers for me to stylistically be like, I'm in it, you know, like I'm involved. I'll give it a free pass. There's nothing giving it a free pass besides the genuine heart behind a lot of the characters, I think. And that was the only thing that really made me feel like I could sit through this, you know, like that's basically what it was. I was like, this is not painful to watch. Like that's basically how I was. But
that's where the nuggets of truth, I guess, come from. You know, the real like effectiveness of this movie comes from those characters and those relationships. You know, and so like for me, that is, in a lot of ways, you know, it's almost like the opposite of something like Lady Bird, you know, with you, where it's like the character didn't connect to you, but the ending did, so, you know, it kind of redeemed it. And I kind of felt the same way too. But in a lot of ways, I think the relationships in Lady Bird and the characters in Lady Bird are just not very well fleshed out. And they're not like they're okay, but a lot of them are pretty 101, pretty rudimentary.
Yeah, they're very flat, but it's done in a comedic style that was like at least entertaining. Like, you know, I'll never forget that one character in that movie who's reading Howard Zinn, I think, right?
Yeah.
That guy, I was like, this is like such a fun, like one note woke, like intellectual.
You're like, yeah, I know people like that. Like,
exactly. Yeah. And so like seeing things like that, I was like, those are those little setting nugget thingies that I was like, at least I can laugh and get like enjoyment out of this moment, even if I'm somewhat irritated by the driving conflict in the plot, which is just I'm a young girl fighting with my mom or something like that. I was like, whatever,
but
dude.
The thing I'll say about this movie is, instead of being sort of like meh characters, meh relationships, but good ending, this is like the characters and the relationships are really what you watch it for. It's not about necessarily where things go, because, you know, he's talking about his own life, you know, so like he doesn't have a conclusion. And I think that's okay. You know, I think as long as, and this is kind of a caveat, I guess, but like as long as the characters are kind of what's important in a movie like this. And if that's well done, it makes the movie worthwhile. And narratively, I think you're given a bit of closure in terms of how things end. You know, he's given this independence, he's given this freedom in some ways. but you can also see how there's going to be consequences to it. You can see how there's going to be, potentially something, every time he's given a little bit of freedom, the consequence is bigger and bigger in some ways. And so you can see that coming back. But also, this is like him expressing the ultimate desire of his, of his independence. So yeah, so I think it's fair that this is kind of an ambiguous ending. It doesn't necessarily need a conclusion in my mind, because it's a movie that has strong characters and strong relationships, and that's really what it's about, honestly. So
Yeah, I and even hearing you talk about it with more of a positive detail, right? I don't like disagree with anything you're saying, Like I'm like, yeah, I totally see that. I think there was just a resonating factor that maybe does take more viewings. I really don't know. Maybe it was the week getting down on me or something. I enjoy sometimes, like when we have these conversations, I enjoy the idea of the film more than actually sitting and watching it,
Sure,
especially
yes,
some of
yes.
these like high class, or I mean, I don't know, like movies that are harder to chew on. That's what how I'm going to say it. Right. I just like, as you talked about it, I guess a little bit of spoilers for it. It's kind of an older movie, so if you haven't seen it, but I feel like most people haven't heard of this. So there's an ending scene where he's running towards the symbolic representation of independence, right? The beach. And that scene is very long and almost kind of like scary and drawn out. And the kid is running and running and he's still running. And in my head, I'm watching it and I'm thinking, I don't know what's coming, right? Now reflecting on the movie, right? But I'm like, boy, they're really making this kid like run. That's what I thought about. I was like, he's really running for a long time. They're not cutting. Like he's just going, and he's really like starting to kind of lose his breath a little bit. And then to see like the symbolic conclusion, oh, now he's independent for this brief moment after this like scary escape and stuff. I'm like, because of your interpretation or the way that you phrase it, Cameron, I can be like, yeah, like I can see that stuff. I wish I knew about it. Like I wish I was invested. I wish I knew like something. I feel like maybe if you've listened this far in the episode and you're kind of like, oh, this sounds interesting, like this is a time for you to like go and check this movie out and be like, oh, I can really chew on those bits. I think this movie, I've never heard of this movie in my life. So a little bit of exposure and context, like this could be a good one to get something out of, my emotional response to it was very flat line, like just not much going on. Cameron, is there anything like you want to share about this movie, like that you haven't shared so far? Because we're coming up here on an hour. I know you haven't said your shot of the film yet.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple things that I'll talk about in conclusion about the movie. Just some minor points, I guess. One is that the I know you said you were confused about the name. The name is kind of a botched translation in any case. It's a phrase in French that basically means like many pranks or many steps along the road to delinquency in some ways. And so like it's like an idiom kind of. And so like the 400 blows doesn't really make sense. It's not really a good translation. So if that clarifies anything for you.
It does. Can I actually ask you something? This is just, maybe we're going to share this, but was this movie shot like in a guerrilla style? Like were a lot of people in this movie without knowing they were in this movie?
This was not as guerrilla as something like Breathless. obviously there's a lot more characters in this movie,
Yeah.
but they didn't have a big budget, obviously, and it wasn't a movie that was played a lot in theaters, although it did win in Cannes. It won the whatever their main award is. So it did do well critically, but in terms of like guerrilla style filmmaking, I would say sort of, with the caveat that they used like sets and stuff, like people's houses as sets, basically.
Of course.
They
It's
weren't
just-
like going into the street as much as something like Breathless. you know?
Yeah, but there were moments, I think, where like the funny scene where all the kids are like ditching during the PE run. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're on top of some sort of roof filming down
Yeah.
at them.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking to myself, this looks like a regular street. Like I don't think anybody
Totally.
knows like what's going on, you know?
Yeah,
So-
of course. Yeah, so yeah, stuff like that is kind of where you can tell. Although, again, like as a more subtle movie and a more well-made movie, like those, it's not really where you like. He doesn't draw attention necessarily to those parts. He kind of wants you to think that there's a little bit more of a budget than there is, and so like yeah, for a moment like that, you're like, okay, I can tell where like this wasn't really like you didn't get a permit to shoot this, or you didn't, you didn't shut down the street or anything. There's a couple moments where like he's running down the street with the typewriter, after he's stolen the typewriter, and people are like kind of looking at him like weird,
Yeah.
But for the most part, he does a good job of being like, I guess, like making it look like a pretty professional movie. And yeah, so I think he does a good job in that. I did want to just go through a couple quotes from A Certain Tendency of the French Cinema to kind of give his perspective on like where things were in France in the mid 50s. This one that I find really funny is, it's kind of like the opener of the essay is, if the French cinema exists by means of about 100 films a year, it is well understood that only 10 or 12 merit the attention of critics and cinephiles, the attention, therefore, of Cahiers, the magazine. So he's saying, like, most of what we produce is, like, utter trash, basically. And there's another... so he was really influential, and he talks a bit in this article, but goes more into it in a later article. He was very influential in the idea of auteur cinema, which I've mentioned. Isaac, pop quiz, what is auteur cinema?
I'm just sitting here thinking like, I've heard him say it. I have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah, so auteur cinema is basically the idea that the director is the person who the director is the one who has a direct vision over the film. He's the one who sets everything in motion, and everything goes by him. The idea basically is he should be the artist. Like, he's the painter of the film. It's not the guy who makes the sound, or the guy who makes, who edits the movie, although that could be a contributing factor, in the same way that, like, if you choose an oil paint versus a different paint, that will affect the end product. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the person painting, and that's what they're really they're trying to express with their movies. And so he was really, really influential in that idea, and he talked a lot about Hitchcock as kind of the pure auteur director, and he probably was for the time. But I think we can kind of see auteurs come from, like, they're modern examples of like a pure auteur director. Kubrick, he's not modern necessarily, but Kubrick was an auteur. Someone like Christopher Nolan, I think, is fairly auteur. And then I think David Fincher is probably the biggest working auteur director at the moment. I would say he's the guy. He's like the auteur right now. And then people like Scorsese certainly are. People like David Lynch. We just talked about David Lynch. He's very much an auteur director, although working in different spheres, so it's kind of different. But yeah, so I guess in some ways, in some ways, you can see that in this film, right? You can see the auteur theory coming out, in that it's not as obvious in terms of his stylistic choices as someone like Godard. Godard is very, very much into experimenting with film as his way of like being the auteur. With this, it's about his life, essentially, his story, his example of what he's trying to portray. And I think that comes across in this movie. So, yeah, so I guess that's all I have to say about the 400 Blows. But yeah,
I think it's time to give it a rating, Cameron.
Yeah, I would say.
Well, hold on. We rate here at Cinema Spectator on a scale of for everyone, for casuals, for the curious, and for the cinephiles. This is a hard one, Cameron. I'd like to hear where you place it.
I would say this is likely for either the curious or the cinephiles. And the reason why I say that is partly because it's not like a movie that I would just say like, oh, everybody needs to watch this. Because I don't think you do necessarily. Although I think if you're looking, you're able to pick things from this movie. If you're looking and able to kind of, I guess like, you don't even. The thing is, you don't even really have to push that hard to get something out of this movie. It's like just if you're interested in this realm of telling stories, if you're interested in the how and the why of telling stories through film, you're gonna get something out of this movie, I think.
I think I'm gonna agree with you, but I'm gonna land it at for the curious, because if you know a little bit about it and you're going in, you already have that curiosity. I think you'll find something, right? I just think maybe I had a pea brain, or I just wasn't connecting with some. I really like. I think the most positive thing I can say is that I wasn't down on the film. I think there is a lot of heart that is good in it. Like if you walk in excited to see something like this, you won't be let down, and you don't have to be some mustache twirling like cinephile that's be like, oh, this is so perfect. You can even hear from the director's perspective in writing in the paper, like he was kind of fed up with movies in general, but at least he has the ability to, make it approachable, maybe for their more direct local audience, and even it translates overseas for someone who doesn't watch a ton of black and white movies spoken in a different language. Like, I sat through it and I thought it was fine. Like, it was good. So yeah, I would say it's for the curious.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I think that wraps up our conversation on the 400 Blows. Cameron, do you want to give any sort of look ahead for people? Is the poll going to be up for them?
Yeah, the poll will be up. I haven't finalized what I'm going to put on it, but I think there's going to be some fun movies, some interesting movies, a couple more modern French films. So things that, someone like Isaac might be interested in. And next week we are going to be watching a fun movie. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
This is a movie that I think we both can connect with because we both have kind of a disdain for Jean-Luc Godard. It's a movie that is making fun of him to no end, and it's one that I find really enjoyable. It's called Godard Mon Amour, or in French, Le Redoutable, and it came out in 2017. I didn't get to see it during Cannes, but it was shown in the year that I went to Cannes. So yeah, it's fun. It's kind of, it's a little bit goofier than the movies that we've watched. Maybe not as goofy as Playtime, but in a way, it's more of a straight comedy. So I think we'll have fun next week watching it together, and that'll be the commentary track for this month.
All right, awesome. Well, any thoughts of where they can stream that or find it?
Yeah, it'll be on Amazon Prime. You can rent it. I think that's it.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, shout out to our executive producer, Darren O'Neill. Again, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions and get some exclusive benefits. We love all you free listeners as well. We post here every Monday. Thank you for listening to Cinema Spectator. Give us a rating. It helps a ton, and we'll see you guys next week. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast, executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.